Her son stole $115,000 using her name. Carolyn Armitage, 72, didn't flinch. She filed for fraud. By Friday, his company was dead, his cards declined, and his face wiped from her will. He called her a ghost with a checkbook. Now, she was the audit haunting his empire. She raised him with love, but she'd bury him with paperwork. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. The words slithered through the air duct like smoke, faint but thick enough to choke her. Carolyn sat on the edge of her bed, still in her gardening gloves, soil crusted beneath her nails, her knees aching from kneeling too long beside the hydrangeas. Outside, a breeze rustled the old oak branches, but inside, the voices rose clearly through the shared wall. Honestly, Josh's voice scoffed, she was better when she was quiet and broke. The laugh that followed wasn't his, it was Vanessa's, tight, nasal, and sharp. Please, she snorted, retired in more ways than one. It's like living with a ghost who reorganizes the spice rack. Carolyn didn't move, not even to exhale. Her hand tightened around the worn leather of her gardening shears until the metal edge bit into her palm. A pause. Then Josh again. You know, back then she actually listened. Didn't have all these opinions. Now she reads one estate planning article and suddenly thinks she's Warren freaking Buffett. They were in the living room, maybe 10 feet away, but it might as well have been another planet. Her home, her second property, the one she'd handed over, rent-free, so her son could bootstrap his startup and build something meaningful, as he'd said. Carolyn stood slowly, her knees protesting, and walked into her bedroom closet, shutting the door behind her. The vent was clearer here. She sank onto the low bench beneath her coats, the walls pressing in like the years. I swear, Josh continued, she actually double-checked my reimbursement for the printer ink last week. That's $70. You'd think I robbed her. You kind of did, Vanessa said dryly. She paid for our Napa trip last month and doesn't even know it. Joint card, babe. Don't ask, don't tell. A sound left Carolyn's throat before she could stop it. A dry, involuntary gasp that sounded too much like a sob. She clamped a hand over her mouth, biting down on her knuckles until her vision blurred. They laughed again. Toasted something with glasses that clinked. She pictured the dinner table, her mother's old oak, now covered in laptops, takeout containers, and empty wine bottles. The space she had once filled with spelling quizzes, hand-sewn birthday banners, and grocery store cakes. Now it held mockery, disdain, entitlement with a side of rosé. Carolyn straightened. Rage didn't bubble up. It didn't flare. It settled. Cold. Precise. Like a wind changing direction just before a storm. She walked to her desk. Her fingers moved slower than they used to, but her mind hadn't dulled. She opened her laptop, logged in, and let the familiar dashboard greet her. Accounts, investments, property titles, trust allocations. Years ago, she'd promised herself she wouldn't meddle, that she would let Josh find his own way. That kindness, when given freely, would teach him to be kind in return. She clicked a folder. Inside, her retirement portfolio, conservative but well-cultivated, a nest egg she'd grown from decades of double shifts, secretarial days, diner nights. She thought of peeling potatoes with swollen fingers, of walking home after midnight in winter, her breath freezing in the air, only to rise at 5 again for school drop-offs. Also, Josh could go to private school, so he wouldn't have to stand where she did, just outside the warmth, hearing laughter through the wall. Carolyn opened a new folder. She titled it Contingency, not Revenge, not Payback. She didn't need melodrama, just contingency, for those moments when love had to be measured in decimals and boundaries had to be notarized. A creak echoed from the hall, probably Vanessa heading to the fridge for wine. Carolyn didn't flinch. She stared at the screen, her face neutral, lit in the soft glow of futures quietly being rewritten. Tomorrow she'd make some calls, quiet ones, just a few changes, just enough. But tonight, she let herself feel the split. Not grief, not anger, just a clean break. Carolyn sipped her tea slowly, the chamomile gone cold, but her thoughts anything but calm. The cursor blinked on the screen like a patient heartbeat, waiting for instruction. On the monitor, her accounts stretched out like a city skyline: investment portfolios, property deeds, trust allocations. Quiet pillars of a life built with grit, with no safety net except her own stubbornness. She glanced at the file she'd created the night before. Contingency. She clicked into it. Outside, the sun was creeping over the hedge line, throwing soft gold across the back patio. Inside, Carolyn wore the same cardigan she always had for serious days, the one with a tiny fray in the left cuff she kept meaning to fix. Her desk was cluttered but familiar, stationery tucked in brass trays, a photo of her late husband, and next to it, a picture of Josh at age 10, holding a trophy he'd cried over earning. She minimized the photo with a sigh. She opened each account, carefully, methodically. She didn't flinch at the numbers, though she noticed more discrepancies than before. Transaction history had fingerprints all over it, monthly Venmo transfers marked consulting, fees paid to companies she'd never heard of, and Uber rides from a city she knew neither Josh nor Vanessa worked in. She picked up the phone and dialed. "Hello?" her financial advisor answered, cheerful and clueless. "Patrick, good morning. I need to make changes, effective immediately." Her voice was calm, even. "Changes?" he asked, tapping on a keyboard she could hear faintly through the receiver. "How quickly can we change account permissions, joint access, and trustee control?" A beat. "We can start today, but everything okay?" "Everything's quiet," she said. "That's the problem." She hung up and felt something inside her settle, like furniture being rearranged after years of disorder. Later that morning, Josh burst into the kitchen with his usual lack of boundaries, phone in one hand, leash in the other. "Hey, Ma, listen. Vanessa and I are going to Paso for the weekend. Wine tasting thing with her old college friends. Can you watch Oscar?" Carolyn turned, towel in hand. "Of course. He likes scrambled eggs for breakfast, remember?" Josh looked almost relieved, mistaking her poise for passivity. "Thanks, I'll Venmo you." She didn't mention the irony. By noon, they were gone. Josh in that jacket he couldn't afford on his own, Vanessa waving lazily from the passenger seat of their leased SUV. Carolyn waited until the gate latched shut before heading to the back hallway. The safe was still where it had always been, behind the linen closet, disguised by a false panel. She punched in the code, her wedding anniversary, and the door clicked open like an old secret, forgiving her for waiting so long. Inside were folders neatly labeled: house title, insurance, will, medical directives. She pulled each out, spread them across the dining table, and began sorting. 3 hours passed. The light shifted. So did Carolyn. She unfolded a fresh statement from one of the joint credit cards. Charges bloomed like bruises across the page. $1,300 at Louboutin, $860 at Nobu Malibu, a $2,400 deposit for a yacht charter. Her hands trembled, not from weakness, from calculation. She pulled up her will on her laptop and adjusted the language herself before sending it to Patrick for notarized revisions. Effective immediately. All disbursements to listed heirs are paused pending full review. The cursor hovered over send. She clicked. Just after dusk, she fed Oscar, patted his head, and watched him curl into the throw blanket like nothing in the world had shifted. Across town, Josh sat at a sleek Italian bistro, pitching a new client over sea bass and martinis. The waiter returned with a politely apologetic expression. "Sir, I'm afraid your card's been declined." Josh frowned, pulling out his phone. He opened his banking app. The screen loaded, then blinked red, frozen. Josh slammed the French press onto the counter, the sharp clink of glass on quartz cutting through the morning quiet like a slap. The dog whimpered from under the table. Carolyn, already seated with a half-finished crossword and her buttered toast cooling on a porcelain plate, didn't flinch. "What the hell did you do to the accounts?" His voice cracked around the edges, too loud for the hour, too full of nerves for a man who thought himself in control. Carolyn took her time folding the newspaper. "Good morning, Josh." He stepped closer, his mouth drawn tight. Don't do that. Don't play coy. My card declined in front of a client. My client. The embarrassment? Do you even realize? She looked up slowly, eyes calm behind wire-framed glasses. Must be a system glitch, she said evenly. Happens when systems detect abuse. Josh's jaw worked, but no words came for a beat. Then, footsteps. Fast ones. Vanessa entered in a satin robe, phone in hand, mascara already half done. You froze our accounts? She hissed. You've been digging through our finances without telling us? That's my finances, Carolyn interrupted, placing her cup down with a soft clink. You were guests on the accounts, not partners. There's a difference. Vanessa blinked as if she hadn't realized the house could speak back. This is insane. You told us we had full access. You said, I said I trusted you, Carolyn said. That's not the same thing as giving you the deed. Josh pushed his hand through his hair. You're sabotaging me. Do you know what this does? To my credit? To my company? Carolyn stood slowly. Not angry. Just taller. I know exactly what it does, she said. He stared at her, stunned for a moment, then stormed out, muttering something under his breath that she chose not to catch. Vanessa followed, slamming the sliding door behind her. The glass trembled. Carolyn remained still, watching the French press drip its last bitter drops. Later that day, Josh called a lawyer, one of those young guys with flashy LinkedIn titles and a voice too eager to impress. He had the call on speaker as he paced the upstairs hallway. There's no legal claim here, the lawyer said plainly. If the assets were solely in her name and you were an authorized user, not co-owner, you're out of luck. No inheritance rights have been executed, so there's nothing to contest yet. Josh swore. Carolyn heard all of it from her study, didn't say a word. Instead, she opened a drawer and pulled out her old leather journal, worn, spine cracked, pages softened by time and grief. She hadn't touched it since the year after her husband died, but today, the pen moved like it had never left her hand. Day 1. Disrespect is always quiet before it's loud. Emotional temperature, 6 out of 10. Simmering with restraint. Actionable. Monitor household behavior. Do not reveal next step. That evening, she walked to the library, as she often did on Thursdays. The woman at the front desk, Diana, sharp-eyed and soft-spoken, tilted her head. You okay? You've got that look. Carolyn smiled faintly. Just recalibrating. Diana leaned closer. You know, if anyone's exploiting your finances, even family, you can look into elder abuse protections. Financial exploitation's real. The law's catching up. Carolyn nodded. That's good to know. She checked out 2 books, Trust Structures and Estate Law and the Anatomy of Control. No one questioned it. Back home, the hallway was quiet. But not still. She could feel a tension pulsing from behind the closed office door where Josh was likely recalculating everything. She made herself tea, fed Oscar. Then, out of habit, checked the mail. Among the envelopes was one from a local lender she didn't recognize. Her fingers stiffened as she read. Application notification. Pre-approval for home equity loan. Property listed as collateral. Her property. Her name. Her son. Carolyn lowered the letter, her breath catching just once. She turned off the kettle. It was no longer just disrespect. It was trespass. The notary's pen hesitated an inch from the page. Carolyn didn't blink. Are you sure you want to proceed? The banker asked, lips pursed like he'd bitten into something sour. This'll trigger formal fraud protocol, possibly criminal review. Carolyn glanced down at the signature line of the property lien request. Her name was there, but it wasn't hers. Not in ink, not in motion, not in conscience. The loops were off. The Y in Carolyn ended in a sharp uptick. Josh always mimicked her style, but he never could fake that last flourish. Yes, she said. Let it trigger whatever it needs to. I'm not afraid of paper cuts anymore. She signed the affidavit, the scratch of pen on paper sharper than any argument. Her banker nodded, suddenly reverent. I'll personally notify the fraud division. By late afternoon, she stood in the county clerk's office with her estate attorney, Mark, a bulldog in loafers and a linen suit. Together, they pulled up the power of attorney form Josh had notarized back in 2018 when Carolyn was recovering from pneumonia. At the time, it felt like a precaution. Now it felt like a loaded weapon she'd unknowingly holstered on his hip. "I want it revoked," she said. "Now, retroactively if possible." Mark nodded without asking why. "We'll reissue full authority to you and add a clause barring him from future access. I'll prep the docs tonight." "Make the language surgical," she said, voice steady. "And final." Saturday arrived with unexpected noise, bass thumping through the walls, laughter echoing off the porch columns, the smell of grilled meats and overpriced cologne flooding the air. Carolyn paused at the base of the driveway, one hand on Oscar's leash, the other clutching her clutch bag like a declaration. Balloons in gold and blush floated on twisted strings. A banner screamed, "Happy 35th, Josh!" Across the veranda she once painted with her husband in summer sweat and quiet joy. She hadn't been invited, but that didn't matter. Carolyn stepped through the gate like she still owned the deed, because she did. Heads turned, conversations stuttered. Vanessa caught sight of her from the patio bar and froze, champagne flute suspended mid-air. Carolyn was dressed in a midnight blue pantsuit with pearl cuffs and a sweep of silver across her collarbone. Every inch of her looked intentional, controlled, unapologetic. "Carolyn, hey, didn't know you were coming," Vanessa said, cheeks tight. "I know," Carolyn replied simply. "This wasn't cleared with me." Josh appeared then, shirt half-buttoned, sunglasses perched on his head like a crown he didn't earn. "Can we not do this here?" "Of course," Carolyn said with a serene smile. She waved a hand behind her. Mark, her attorney, stepped in holding a slim leather portfolio. "We're just dropping off a few things," she said. "Gifts, if you will." She approached the first group of guests, friends of Josh's from tech circles, judging by the logoed hoodies and ironic blazers. One by one, Carolyn handed them manila envelopes, each marked private and confidential. Inside, snapshots of bank statements, revoked access notifications, and a legal footnote stating she was officially no longer financially tied to Josh or Vanessa in any capacity. The silence spread like spilled ink. The music still played, but no one was dancing. "What the hell is this?" Josh barked, flipping through the papers. Carolyn looked around. "Just making sure everyone understands the liabilities they're hitching their names to." Vanessa hissed under her breath. "You're trying to ruin him." Carolyn met her gaze evenly. "No, dear. I'm letting him ruin himself. You're just the collateral." One by one, the guests quietly excused themselves. Sudden errands, early mornings, babysitters to get back to. Gossip moved faster than music, and this party was dead by sunset. That night, Carolyn sipped scotch beside the fireplace, her heels off, her smile quiet. Across town, Vanessa sat in front of her laptop, refreshing the business banking app for her online boutique. Access denied, account suspended pending account holder authorization. She tried again, then again. Her jaw tightened. Her fingers flew to text Josh. The screen blinked and a new message loaded. "Credit line removed. Co-applicant no longer authorized." Vanessa stared at the screen. For the first time, the silence felt personal. The envelope arrived unmarked. No sender, no logo, just her name typed on the front in a cold, corporate font. Carolyn nearly tossed it into the recycling with the grocery ads. But something made her stop. Maybe it was the weight, or maybe it was intuition. Sharp now, like a weather vane before a storm. Inside, a letter, not from a bank, from a private investment partner. It referenced a delinquent payment, $115,000, tied to a short-term bridge loan. Her name, her address, her property listed as secured collateral. The kicker? She had never seen the loan, never signed it. And the signature on file, while better forged than the lien attempt, still wasn't hers. Carolyn read the letter twice, once silently, once aloud. Her voice cracked on the phrase, "Failure to remit funds will result in legal escalation." She sat down hard in the kitchen chair, a cold sweat breaking across her shoulders. Oscar padded into the room, ears tilted, sensing something not right in her breath. She picked up the phone. Not Josh, not Vanessa. This needed quiet action. The woman at her financial institution's fraud division was named Rhonda. Calm voice, clipped sentences, and a tone that made Carolyn sit up straighter. "Can I file an investigation anonymously?" Carolyn asked. "Technically no," Rhonda replied. "But discreetly?" "Yes. We'll begin a silent review on your personal financial network. You'll hear from someone within 72 hours. "What kind of someone?" "Someone with a magnifying glass and no patience for liars." It didn't take 72 hours. It took 31. The call came from a man named Whit Dillard, a forensic accountant with a background in fraud litigation and a voice like sandpaper on velvet. "I've reviewed your statements and the flagged loan," he said. "Your son's used your address to register 4 shell companies in the past 2 years." Carolyn's throat went dry. 4? 2 are inactive. 1 is under IRS scrutiny. The 4th, Redbridge Solutions, has your address listed as headquarters and shows movement of over $400,000. She swallowed. "And the loan?" "There is no loan. Not in any legal sense. It's a fabricated debt. Phony paperwork sent to a partner to stall payment. A confidence game to keep money moving and hands clean. But if you respond to it, you legitimize it." Carolyn leaned back, pulse quickening. "So why the letter to me? You're the only real asset in the equation. Your name carries equity. You were never supposed to see the bill." She could feel her fingers shaking slightly as she gripped the arm of her chair. "Can this come back to me?" "If you stay passive, maybe," Whit said bluntly. "If you act now, number I can wall off your liability." She didn't hesitate. "Do it." He paused. "One more thing. You should consider adding a restraining order clause to future estate documents. If this escalates, you'll want a paper trail that shows you anticipated his behavior." Carolyn looked toward the study, where Josh's childhood photos still sat on the bookshelf. "I already started one." That evening the phone rang again. Unknown number. She answered on instinct. A man's voice, slick with rehearsed charm and unearned confidence, greeted her. "Mrs. Armitage, this is Dean. I believe you received my letter." Carolyn said nothing. "I'm what you might call a mutual acquaintance of your son's," he continued casually. "Josh and I had a deal. You were listed as part of the collateral structure. Technically speaking, I'm not part of anything," Carolyn cut in. "And if you contact me again, my lawyer will explain that to you slowly and with citations." Dean laughed softly. "Come on, Carolyn. I'm just trying to keep this clean. Josh is a smart kid, just got ahead of himself. He'll pay me back. But in the meantime, you wouldn't want—" She hung up, blocked the number, wrote down every word. She was done being spoken to like a soft target. By Monday morning, Whit had a full report on her desk. It read like a scandalous novella: offshore transfers, ghost invoices, and false receipts coded as consulting. Carolyn flipped through the pages, stunned by how methodical it all was. "He used your name as the financial spine," Whit explained. "Everything he built, however unstable, rests on the illusion that your estate backs it." Carolyn tapped a page. "And now?" He met her eyes. "We've got enough to destroy him, legally." The smell of rosemary and slow-roasted beef wafted through the air, buttery and warm, masking the chill that hummed just beneath the walls. Carolyn moved with quiet precision in the kitchen, placing the Dutch oven gently on a hot pad, arranging fresh rolls in a basket, wiping down the last water spot from the wine glasses. Her hands were calm, but every movement was rehearsed. There was no trembling, no hesitation. In the dining room, a discreet voice recorder sat hidden beneath the lace doily at the center of the table, just another piece of old decor, harmless and ignored. The doorbell rang. Oscar barked once, then padded off to his usual corner. Carolyn smoothed her blouse, tucked a silver strand of hair behind her ear, and opened the door with a smile so practiced it nearly felt real. Josh stepped in first, offering a half-hearted hug. Vanessa followed, glancing around like she was already bored. She wore stilettos too tall for a family dinner and lipstick a shade too sharp. "This is unexpected," Josh said, eyeing the set table. "You're really going all out." "It's just dinner," Carolyn replied, closing the door behind them. Something warm, something familiar. They sat, napkins folded neatly on their laps. Josh dug in quickly, chewing like a man who'd forgotten real food. Vanessa toyed with her fork, her bracelet clinking against the plate. "You didn't poison this, right?" she joked, smirking. Carolyn laughed softly. "Only the good parts." They ate in a strange silence, punctuated by shallow conversation about traffic, wine prices, and some influencer Vanessa had argued with online. Carolyn nodded, interjected with interest, poured more Cabernet. She didn't rush. She let the food settle. She let them feel comfortable. Then came the slip. "I told Josh we should have moved the crypto account out of our name months ago," Vanessa said between bites. "But no! He insisted your records were too old to catch it." Carolyn raised her eyebrows just slightly, dabbing the corner of her mouth with a cloth napkin. "My records surprise people more than you'd think." Josh chuckled, not realizing the trap had already sprung. "Well, we figured the old trust was still in place, wasn't expecting the full freeze maneuver. You really got us there." "So I did," Carolyn said gently. Dessert was a quiet affair, chocolate tart, elegantly sliced with fresh cream on the side. They each took seconds. Vanessa complimented the crust. Carolyn stood, walked to the sideboard, and returned with 2 slim envelopes. She placed one beside each plate. "What's this?" Josh asked, brow furrowing. Carolyn sat back down, lifting her wine glass. "A follow-up, just some paperwork. I believe in transparency." They opened them. Vanessa's breath caught first. Josh's lips parted slowly as he read. Inside, a detailed summary of every frozen account, outstanding debt, a record of falsified filings, and a formal disclaimer from Carolyn's attorney stating neither she nor her estate were liable for any financial actions taken by the recipients, effective immediately. "You can't be serious," Josh said, color draining from his face. Carolyn took a sip of wine. "Oh, I'm rarely more serious than when I'm quiet." "You're cutting us off?" Vanessa snapped. "You invited us here just to humiliate us?" Carolyn smiled without teeth. "I invited you to dinner. You humiliated yourselves." Josh stood, the chair legs screeching against the hardwood. "This is going to get legal, I swear, Mom. If you think you can do this and just walk away—" "I already filed the countermotion," Carolyn said, eyes meeting his without a blink. "Last Thursday." Josh's jaw twitched. Vanessa grabbed her purse. They left in silence. No thanks, no hug, just the slam of the front door. Carolyn remained at the table, swirling the last of the wine, the recorder still blinking beneath the doily. The knock on Carolyn's door was hesitant. 3 spaced taps like someone unsure if they deserved to be there. She opened it to find Eric, Josh's college roommate, occasional business partner, and more recently, one of the laughing voices she'd overheard through the vent. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 2 nights. Baseball cap in hand, sweat darkening the collar of his t-shirt. "I'm not here to defend him," he said before she could speak. "I'm here because I should have said something sooner." Carolyn didn't invite him in, not yet. She waited, watching his shoulders drop. "I laughed," he admitted. "That day, when Josh said you were better quiet and broke. I laughed like it was a joke, but it wasn't. And I knew it." Still, she said nothing. Eric fumbled with his phone. "Look, I don't expect forgiveness. I want to do the right thing. Too late, maybe. But still." He opened his photo album and scrolled to a set of screenshots. Text messages. Threads between Josh and Vanessa. Josh: "She still thinks we're being transparent, LOL. Vanessa: "Let her feel useful. She signs whatever if you smile at her first." Josh: "Playing the long game. Once the next round of funding hits, we won't need the Carolyn cushion." Carolyn's breath didn't catch, not this time. She only reached out her hand, and Eric gave her the phone. She forwarded everything to herself, then to Whit, her forensic accountant. No drama, Just documentation. Thank you for bringing this, she finally said, eyes steady. And no, I'm not forgiving you. But you did something right today. That counts. Eric nodded and left without another word. By Tuesday, her inbox had turned hostile. A call from Vanessa's parents came first, hissing through the speaker like a swarm of angry bees. "You've ruined her business," Vanessa's mother screeched. "Our accounts are tied to hers. We've got transactions frozen mid-transfer. What gives you the right to meddle?" Carolyn was slicing a pear at the kitchen counter. She didn't stop. "You might want to ask your daughter about the loan fraud before you aim your anger this way," Vanessa's father chimed in. "She said this was all temporary, that you'd cooled down. This is madness." Carolyn smiled into the fruit, the blade moving cleanly. "Madness is letting someone treat your kind. Ness like a credit limit." She hung up. Later that week, Witt sent a quiet update. Investor withdrawal totals. 4 remaining capital in Josh's startup, less than 12%. She read it with no joy, only relief. Silence was heavy, but it moved things. Sometimes it even crushed them. Court day. The hallway smelled like old paper and filtered air. Carolyn sat in a navy dress suit, her estate attorney Mark beside her, cool and focused. Josh sat 3 rows ahead, shoulders hunched, suit wrinkled. Vanessa was absent. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge, stern but fair-eyed, flipped through the thick folder Mark had submitted. It included everything: forged docs, the asset screenshots from Eric, Witt's financial trail maps, and Carolyn's notarized statements. "Mr. Armitage," the judge said, setting the folder down, "your behavior suggests patterns of deception over multiple years. The court takes financial elder abuse seriously, even when the victim doesn't fit the usual profile." Josh opened his mouth. Mark stood first. "Your Honor, my client has already revoked all legal authority from Mr. Armitage. Today we're asking for 2 things: protective financial oversight for Ms. Armitage's estate, and a court-ordered full audit of Mr. Armitage's financial activity over the past 5 years. Josh scoffed. "This is ridiculous. She's not helpless." The judge didn't even look at him. "Irrelevant. Financial harm doesn't require physical dependency." Silence. Carolyn folded her hands in her lap. She didn't need to say anything, not now. The judge nodded once. "Motion granted. Full audit to begin immediately." Josh stood, panic creeping into his eyes. "What does that mean?" The judge answered without flinching. "It means every lie you wrote in ink is about to bleed." It started with a spreadsheet. Row after row of red flag transactions, each one a tiny ember smoldering beneath the surface of Josh's carefully curated empire. But when the auditors laid it bare in court, the smoke turned to fire. Crypto. That was the first crack. Nearly $90,000 vanished into vapor through an offshore exchange linked to a coin called Zephyrbit, which the audit report noted was currently under federal investigation for securities manipulation. The coin's founders had vanished 6 months ago. Josh had marked the entries as consultant payments. The judge raised an eyebrow. Then came the fake brands. One LLC, Legacy Tree Solutions, had 3 listings on invoices and 0 presence anywhere online. No website, no address, no staff. Another, Optic Slate Media, had billed Josh's startup $22,400 for brand expansion. The address? A P.O. box tied to Vanessa's maiden name. By the time the third shell company was uncovered, Carolyn didn't need to look at Josh's face to know the panic had taken root. She could hear it in the way his foot tapped uncontrollably against the courtroom tile. But it was Vanessa's move that sealed it. A quiet withdrawal, made in 5 transfers over 4 months, totaling nearly $60,000, routed not to their joint account, but into one bearing her mother's name. The audit showed the final transfer happened the same week Carolyn's accounts had first been frozen. When questioned, Vanessa's mother claimed she thought it was a business loan. The judge didn't buy it. Neither did Carolyn. Outside the courthouse, the air smelled of impending rain and exhaust. Carolyn stood beneath the overhang, her coat draped over one arm, watching as Josh ignored the press and practically sprinted to his car. A reporter approached her. Young, nervous, voice shaking. "Ms. Armitage, Can you comment on the charges being considered? Carolyn looked straight into the lens. Only that it takes years to build trust, and 10 seconds to lose it. She walked away before the next question was asked. By week's end, Carolyn sat with her estate planner at a sunlit office overlooking the marina. The air tasted of salt and faint jasmine from the planters outside. Her fingers rested gently on a revised draft of her trust documents. "Let's remove all references to Joshua Armitage as a beneficiary," she said calmly. "Replace them with these." She slid over a typed list: a STEM scholarship at her old community college, a housing fund for single mothers under 30, a donation clause to her late husband's Veterans Education Foundation. Her planner blinked, reading, "This is extensive." Carolyn smiled. So was the damage. He nodded, adjusted his glasses, and began to draft. That Friday, Carolyn pulled into the driveway of her new home, a modest, ivy-covered bungalow 2 blocks from the Pacific. The sound of waves was a constant hum in the background. Inside, the floors were old wood and soft light, and the air smelled of eucalyptus from the diffuser she'd set up earlier that morning. She unpacked slowly, placing framed photos on the mantel, her husband in uniform, Oscar curled up as a puppy, a snapshot of her at age 32 with a wrench in one hand and a child on her hip. There were no pictures of Josh. She wasn't erasing the past, she was redrawing it with better lines. That evening, across the city, Vanessa was finishing her second glass of Chardonnay when the doorbell rang. She opened it to a woman in a gray suit, holding a thin envelope. "Vanessa Calloway?" the woman asked. "Yes?" Vanessa said, squinting. "You've been served." Vanessa stared down at the papers, then ripped them open. Notice of business license review, suspicion of fraudulent financial activity. Her hand trembled. The wine glass slipped, shattering across the tile. The file was only 12 minutes long. 12 minutes of wine clinks, casual cruelty, and voices that never thought they'd echo beyond those walls. Carolyn listened to it once more, headphones on, seated in her quiet coastal living room with Oscar curled beside her feet. She could hear the precise moment Vanessa called her a ghost with a checkbook, the glib laugh Josh gave after admitting he manipulated her to sign anything. Carolyn didn't flinch. She simply saved the audio to a clean folder titled Echoes. Then she attached it to an encrypted email, subject line, "Anonymous submission, financial elder abuse, unfiltered." The recipient? A podcast called The Golden Quiet, a rising platform dedicated to financial abuse survivors, especially older adults ignored by the legal system. Carolyn had listened to their episodes while weeding her garden. One story, about a woman in Florida whose own daughter drained her retirement, had stuck with her. She didn't include her name, didn't need to. Truth had its own signature. The episode dropped on a Monday morning. By noon, it had 80,000 streams. By nightfall, it hit 1.2 million. The hosts played only a 3-minute excerpt of the recording, the part where Josh described Carolyn as a safety net with a pulse, and Vanessa joked, "Let her feel useful. She's already basically dead weight." The audio was crisp, their voices unmistakable. Listeners exploded with outrage. Hashtags trended. "Ja protect our elders." "Vanessa Calloway exposed." Josh Armitage unfunded comment sections flooded with fury. One Twitter user wrote, "If your mother gave you a house and your response is to mock her on her own dime, you don't deserve oxygen in her zip code." The ripple hit fast. Vanessa's influencer brand, built around empowered femininity and financial independence, collapsed overnight. Her partnerships evaporated. Her beauty line's online shop was down within 48 hours, her merchant account citing pending fraud review. Then came the kill shot, an Instagram Live from one of Vanessa's former collaborators. She mocked her mother-in-law for being old, then drained her accounts. That's not branding, that's theft with lipstick. Meanwhile, Josh's company, already hemorrhaging, flatlined. Investors fled en masse, citing reputational risk. The company's official website went dark with a single-line statement. Effective immediately, Armitage Ventures is dissolving operations. Carolyn watched it all unfold without saying a word publicly, but others were speaking now. in comment threads, on news segments, even during a panel on local TV. One retired judge called the audio a landmark example of hidden abuse. A legal columnist wrote, "Silence, it turns out, isn't weakness. It's the sound of the trap setting." On Thursday afternoon, the Golden Quiet team reached out directly. The email read, "Dear Ms. Armitage, yes, we figured it out. We would be honored to feature you on an upcoming episode, anonymously or not. Your strength gave other women words they didn't know they needed. We think your voice deserves a microphone." Carolyn didn't reply right away. She reread the message while sipping her morning coffee, Oscar snoring beside her, the ocean stretching wide and unapologetic outside her window. She finally wrote back 3 words: "Let's do it." The podcast episode aired live. Carolyn didn't hide behind a distorted voice filter. She spoke plainly, clearly, her voice steady like the hand that once built 2 homes and raised a son who mistook kindness for weakness. "I thought protecting him meant saving him from consequences," she said, her tone even. "But protecting yourself is not betrayal. It's survival." The episode went viral. Again. This time, not in outrage, but admiration. Messages poured in from listeners, survivors, adult children, lawyers, grandmothers. One note simply read, "You made it okay for me to say no." That same week, Carolyn received a letter, a real one, handwritten. The return address was a P.O. box in a nearby town. She opened it. "Mom, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but if there's even a chance we could talk, just once, I'll listen. Just once. Please." Josh Carolyn stared at the paper for a long moment, then pulled out a sticky note. She wrote 1 word on it: declined. She tucked it into an envelope, sealed it, and dropped it in the mailbox before her evening walk. 2 days later, a white envelope slid through her mail slot. The header read, "National Trust Protection Alliance Board Appointment Inquiry, Carolyn Armitage." The morning was overcast, the kind of gray that hung heavy without rain. Carolyn stood beside the curb, hands folded over a soft leather folder, as 2 county deputies stepped out of their vehicle. Neither smiled. One nodded politely. "It won't take long, ma'am." "I'm in no rush," Carolyn replied, voice composed. "Let the truth take its time." The front door to her second home, the one they had once paraded as theirs, was wide open, the hinges squeaking every few minutes with the breeze. Inside, movers hired by the court boxed up the remnants of what Josh and Vanessa once called their next empire. Gone were the champagne glasses, the startup pitchboards, the espresso machine Josh once claimed was essential to ideation. Now, half-labeled boxes lined the foyer like unfinished apologies. Carolyn didn't step inside immediately. She waited until she saw them. Josh emerged first, his jaw clenched, bags under his eyes that no concealer could hide. Vanessa followed close behind, makeup smudged, hair thrown up, barefoot on the cold hardwood. "You really did it," she said, more stunned than angry. "You actually pulled the plug." Carolyn met her gaze but said nothing. "This is unbelievable," Vanessa snapped. "You're throwing your own son out like garbage." "No," Carolyn said, stepping forward, her voice even. "I'm removing the garbage from the house." Josh's face hardened, but the fight had drained from his posture. He wasn't pleading now, he was simply unraveling. A deputy approached. "Sir, ma'am, it's time." Vanessa's eyes welled up. "You said we'd be fine, Josh," she whispered. "You said you had everything under control." Josh looked away. They each carried a box as they passed Carolyn on the front walk. Vanessa's was overflowing, makeup palettes, a few silk blouses, a broken framed photo. Josh's held just a pair of headphones and a dying laptop. "Any last words?" Vanessa asked bitterly. Carolyn turned, finally walking up the porch steps. She opened the door slowly and stepped inside. Her answer came over her shoulder. "Only that silence is more honest than your promises ever were." She moved through the house quietly, taking in what was left. The air smelled of lemon cleaner and something synthetic. The walls were bare now, stripped of the art Josh had claimed credit for choosing but never paid for. The hardwood echoed under her shoes. In the living room she paused. The mantel still stood, solid oak, untouched. Carolyn reached into her bag and pulled out a simple framed quote. The handwriting was her own, inked in navy on parchment. "Respect is not inherited, it's earned." She placed it in the center of the mantel, straightening it gently. Then she walked through the halls, humming an old lullaby, the one she used to sing to Josh when he couldn't sleep after thunderstorms. The notes drifted through the empty rooms, soft and warm, like memory refusing to rot. Oscar padded beside her. Even he seemed to understand the finality of it all. At the back of the house, the movers gave her a quiet nod and left through the service gate. She waited until the trucks had rolled down the hill before pulling her phone from her coat. She dialed. A voice answered after the second ring. "Ms. Armitage?" "Yes," she said. "You mentioned your transitional housing program was still waitlisted." "We are. We've had to turn away women weekly." Carolyn looked around the now silent home, one last time. "It's yours," she said. No publicity. No plaque. Just a clean title transfer. Let it be a beginning for someone. The voice on the other end cracked. "God bless you." "I don't need that," Carolyn replied. "Just good paperwork." That evening, as the sun dipped low, she drove past the house one final time. Josh stood outside, watching from across the street, but the home no longer looked at him. It faced forward, and the locks had already been changed. Carolyn hadn't opened that box in years. It was tucked beneath old linens in her bedroom closet, marked only with a piece of masking tape labeled "Keeps J." Dust clung to the flaps like cobwebbed time, and the cardboard had softened at the corners from age and coastal air. Still, she opened it like it might break, if she handled it wrong. Inside, a mess of memories she hadn't been ready to face until now. Tucked between a laminated spelling test and a construction paper Father's Day card was a brown faux leather wallet, child-sized, frayed at the edges, the kind sold at county fairs. Carolyn opened it and found a single photo tucked in the clear slot. Josh, age 8, cheeks flushed, holding a third-place science trophy. His eyes beamed with pride, teeth slightly crooked. She remembered the moment. He'd asked if he could sleep with the trophy on his nightstand so it could see him dream. Carolyn pressed the wallet to her chest, closed her eyes, and let the tears fall. They weren't loud. There was no shaking, no sobbing, just quiet streaks, like rainfall on a window too used to storms to rattle anymore. She didn't cry for who he had become. She cried for who he'd been, and for the version of herself that thought love could save someone from their own choices. The next morning, she sat in her estate planner's office, the ocean visible through the window, gulls crying faintly in the background. Her fingers were steady as she slid a typed packet across the desk. "I'm ready to finalize," she said. No hesitations this time. The planner scanned the contents. Charity allocations, scholarship endowments, and the legal exclusion clause clearly marked Joshua Armitage, disqualified from inheritance due to financial misconduct and breach of fiduciary trust. "Would you like a contingency clause?" he asked gently. "No," Carolyn replied. "Some bridges don't need rebuilding. They need leaving behind." She signed the bottom of the document in one clean motion, ink flowing evenly across the parchment. Her pen didn't hesitate. Not once. That afternoon, her attorney emailed official copies to every major institution where she'd held accounts: bankers, investment advisors, real estate firms, even the credit union where she'd once opened a savings account with Josh at age 12. This wasn't pettiness, it was protection. No loopholes, no room for comeback stories spun in sob-stained emails or crocodile tears at probate. That night, Carolyn sat at her writing desk with a mug of ginger tea, her cat curled on the windowsill behind her. She opened her medical directive and made one final change. Executor, Elise Madden, niece, daughter of Carolyn's sister, deceased. Relationship, trusted family. Legal and medical decision-making granted fully. Elise was a kindergarten teacher in Santa Rosa, honest, grounded, kind in a way that didn't seek attention. When Carolyn called to tell her, Elise didn't ask for details. She simply said, "Thank you. I won't let you down." And Carolyn believed her. She spent the evening sorting papers into labeled folders, not to control the future, but to make peace with it. The air smelled of eucalyptus from the diffuser, and distant waves tapped the shore like a soft metronome marking time. When everything was in place, Carolyn opened the French doors to her small patio. The wind had settled, the sky glowed in lavender layers, and the ocean was a sheet of calm steel under the last fingers of sunlight. She lit a candle and placed it on the table, not for grief, not for mourning, for beginnings, new ones, clean ones, ones that didn't carry the weight of someone else's betrayal. She sat beside it, breathing in the moment, steady and whole. The attic smelled like cedar dust and endings. Carolyn hadn't been up there in years. The pull-string light flickered as it came to life, casting golden halos over bins, boxes, and the quiet remains of decades. She was searching for tax records, something benign, something practical. But her fingers brushed the edge of a long-forgotten shoebox tucked behind a crate of Christmas ornaments and water-stained ledgers. The box wasn't labeled, but inside, nestled among curled Polaroids and the yellowed envelope from their wedding certificate, sat a smaller envelope, cream-colored, heavy, sealed. Across the front, in her husband's unmistakable handwriting, "In case he fails you." Carolyn sat on the attic floor, legs trembling without moving, the letter cradled in her lap like something sacred. For a full minute she couldn't breathe. She just stared. Then she opened it. "My Carolyn, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry for that. But I know you. You won't let anyone see how much that hurt, and you'll try to hold everything together like you always do. But if Josh ever becomes someone who uses you instead of honoring you, don't let him rewrite the story of who you are. You were never just a support beam. You are the whole damn foundation. 20 years ago, I filed an amendment to the trust behind your back. Yes, I know you'll hate that, but I did it to give you full override power. If anything ever went wrong, if Josh ever, God, I hope he doesn't, but if he does, you'll be protected. You have legal authority to redirect everything. You don't need permission. You never did. Love him, but don't let him hollow you out to do it. Love always." Thomas. Carolyn didn't cry right away. She laughed first, a small, broken chuckle that slipped through her like a crack of sunlight through grief. Then the tears came, heavier than any storm. She pressed the letter to her chest and let herself feel it all. The guilt, the vindication, the ache of not being alone after all. He'd seen it. 2 decades ago, he'd seen what she hadn't been willing to admit until now. She hadn't failed Josh. Josh had failed her. That afternoon, Carolyn drove straight to her lawyer's office. The letter sealed in a new envelope with protective plastic. Mark scanned it with disbelief, then reverence. "This gives you full and permanent custodial override." He filed it through a separate estate council in Seattle. Never disclosed. Carolyn smiled through the tears still drying on her cheeks. "He knew me. He knew this day might come." Mark nodded slowly. "I'll have it filed and recorded by Monday." The news rippled faster than Carolyn could have imagined. Local papers picked up the story. Retired widow becomes legal crusader, protects estate from internal abuse, donates former home to transitional housing. But when Coastal Current Weekly ran a feature titled "The Woman Who Fought Quietly," the story went national. It was the podcast's producer who coined the phrase that stuck, "America's Quiet Avenger." Carolyn read the headline on her iPad while stirring lentil soup. Oscar barked once, tail wagging, as if even he understood her victory had reached far beyond what anyone expected. Still, she didn't want accolades. She wanted something lasting. By week's end, she established the Thomas J. Armitage Resilience Scholarship, a full-ride award for adult learners over 30 returning to school in caregiving fields, nurses, social workers, trauma therapists, people who rebuilt lives, not with vengeance, but with endurance. The first recipient was a 42-year-old mother of 2 who had escaped domestic violence and was entering a nursing program. When she received the award letter, she cried on camera. Carolyn watched silently, her hand over her heart. "This is for the ones who never got a head start," the woman said. Carolyn whispered, "Exactly." The mailbox filled with letters, some typed, some handwritten, many with shaky script. Women, veterans, adult children asking for resources. Grandparents with questions about how to protect their savings. She answered everyone. Not with legal advice, but with validation. With reassurance that being too generous was not a flaw, and protecting yourself wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. On a crisp Friday morning, a young reporter stood at her porch with a notepad and a microphone. "Ms. Armitage, would you say this was revenge?" Carolyn smiled. "No," she said, stepping into the light. "This was reclamation." The teacups clinked gently, their porcelain rims catching slants of afternoon sunlight through the bay window. Lavender scones, cucumber sandwiches, and Carolyn's homemade lemon shortbread were laid out on a lace tablecloth that once belonged to her mother. In the corner, a vintage record player hummed out Ella Fitzgerald, low and warm, while 6 grandmothers, some widowed, some quietly fierce, gathered in Carolyn's living room. "I used to think estate planning was for the rich," one woman said, reaching for her second slice of lemon tart. "Turns out it's for the smart." Carolyn smiled. "Exactly. Your will isn't a form. It's your final sentence. Don't let anyone else finish it for you." Laughter bubbled, not polite, earnest. Each woman left with a folder, step-by-step estate literacy guides, printed resources on financial protection, and a handwritten note from Carolyn at the top of each packet. Silence is not surrender, it's strategy. She closed the door after the last guest departed and turned to Oscar, who sat loyally at her feet. "Not bad for a Thursday, huh?" He wagged once, approving. A week later, Carolyn stood in front of a small crowd at the Book Nook, the local independent bookstore. Her name was etched in gold foil on the cover of the short, sharp guide now stacked in front of her, The Power of the Pause by Carolyn Armitage. She didn't read from it. Instead, she shared a story about raising a boy who once asked if respect had to be earned or if it came automatically from being someone's child. She told the crowd how silence became her most potent form of protection, how reclaiming her narrative didn't require revenge, it required resolve. The applause at the end wasn't thunderous, it was reverent. Across town, in a retail chain near the food court, Josh stood behind the returns counter wearing a navy blue polo with a stitched logo he didn't design. His name tag, Josh A., sat crooked, hanging from a plastic clip that had cracked earlier that week. "Can I speak to your manager?" a customer snapped. He sighed. "You already are." Behind him, a young man in khakis approached, a yellow envelope in hand. "Hey, man. Some lady dropped this off for you. Said it was important." Josh frowned, opened it, and read the first line. "Notice of filing. Dissolution of marriage. Vanessa Calloway versus Joshua Armitage." The ink bled slightly where her pen had pressed too hard. He crushed the envelope in his fist and walked to the break room, but no one followed. No one asked. No one cared. Meanwhile, in her sunny office, Carolyn updated her life insurance documents with one final stroke of the pen. Beneficiary: none. Designation: allocated to trust managed. Public grants and transitional housing services. Relation: no known descendant. It was more than a legal formality. It was closure. On her 73rd birthday, the neighborhood organized a surprise block party. Lanterns lined the sidewalks. Local kids drew messages in chalk on her driveway. "Happy birthday, Ms. C. Thank you for helping Grandma." A jazz trio from the community college played Cheek to Cheek. Someone baked a peach cobbler in a cast-iron skillet older than the high school gym. Carolyn wore her best floral dress and a brooch shaped like a fountain pen. She didn't make a speech. She simply raised her glass of sweet tea and nodded. The crowd applauded anyway. Later that night, after the folding chairs were stacked and the candles had burned low, her phone rang. "Hello? Ms. Armitage?" a woman's voice asked, nervous but hopeful. "This is Cynthia from Baylight Youth Center." Carolyn sat upright. "Yes? We heard your podcast segment, and we were wondering, would you consider being our honorary speaker for this year's Courage and Community Gala?" Carolyn didn't answer right away. She looked out the window. The moon hung low, but proud. "I would be honored," she finally said. The lights dimmed slightly as the last row of teenagers filed into the multi-purpose room. The air was thick with anticipation and the faint scent of school pizza lingering from lunch. Carolyn stood at the podium, notes tucked beneath her palm, though she hadn't written a speech. She didn't need one. Behind her, a projector displayed the event title in soft blue, Courage and Community Gala, Baylight Youth Center. The audience was a mix of counselors, staff, and young women, some no older than 20, but with eyes that had already learned to search for exits in every room. Carolyn leaned into the microphone. Her voice didn't boom. It didn't need to. "I was told for a long time that silence was strength," she began. "But silence is only strong when it's chosen, not when it's forced or feared or bought." The room fell silent, reverent, expectant. "I lived a life where I gave too much," she continued. "Time, trust, homes, money. I believed that if I loved hard enough, the people I gave to would turn into the people I needed. But love, without boundaries, isn't generosity. It's surrender." A woman in the third row wiped her cheek. A girl in the front fidgeted with her sleeve but didn't look away. Carolyn smiled gently. "One day I realized something. Revenge wasn't the goal. Reclamation was. I didn't want to hurt the people who hurt me. I wanted to stop bleeding from the places they kept cutting." Soft applause. A few sniffles. No phones out. They were listening with their whole bodies. "I was called quiet for most of my life," Carolyn added. "But quiet doesn't mean powerless. It means watchful, strategic. And when the time came, I didn't raise my voice. I raised my standards." A wave of laughter rolled through the room, surprised and relieved. A release. She stepped back. "Thank you for letting me share my story. I hope it reminds you that boundaries aren't walls. They're doors you lock to keep the peace you build." As she stepped down, a young woman, maybe 19, thin hoodie pulled over her head, rushed forward and wrapped her arms around Carolyn before the guards could react. "You saved me," the girl whispered. "I didn't even know people like you existed." Carolyn hugged her back, tightly, fully. "You do now." Across town, in a quiet apartment he could barely afford, Josh watched the gala livestream on his phone, the brightness turned low, the volume off. He didn't blink as her voice filled the room. He watched the captions. "I raised my standards." He didn't cry, but something in his expression cracked, barely perceptible, like a pane of glass threatening to fracture. The phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Is that your mom?" Josh set the phone face down, and for the first time in a long time, he said nothing. That evening, Carolyn walked the bluffs near her coastal home. The air was cool, the ocean darkening into velvet. The sunset spilled amber and rose across the waves like a final applause from the day. She stopped at the overlook and pulled out her old leather journal, the one that had tracked everything from the freeze to the filings. Its pages were full now. No more room for chapters, only closure. On the last page, in neat script, she wrote, "The best revenge is financial clarity. The second best is sleeping through the night." She smiled, closed the book, and walked home. There, in the fireplace, a neat stack of old bank statements waited. She struck a match and watched the edges curl and darken, glowing orange, then ash. The smell of smoke wrapped the room, warm and fleeting. She didn't mourn what burned. She freed it. The next morning, as sunlight poured through the open windows, her laptop pinged. An email. Subject: "Ready to set up that legacy foundation?" From Patrick, financial advisor. The gala was understated, just as Carolyn would have wanted. No fireworks, no podium speeches, just soft jazz drifting across the coastal garden and rows of string lights swaying above linen-covered tables. A small bronze plaque mounted at the entrance read, "The Quiet Rise Fund, in honor of Carolyn Armitage, for those who rebuild, after silence." Inside, a wall of framed photos displayed the faces of those whose lives the fund had already changed: single mothers, first-gen college students, women who had fled abusive households with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Dozens had gone on to become nurses, educators, financial advisors. A handful had started foundations of their own. The fund had grown into an annual engine of second chances, fueled by Carolyn's restructured estate and ongoing contributions from others inspired by her story. The fund didn't advertise, it didn't recruit, it didn't beg, it just delivered. 2 states away, in a shared studio apartment above a vape shop, Josh sat in front of a glowing laptop screen. His hair was longer now, patchy in spots. A deep crease had settled between his brows. He'd applied anonymously, no name, no personal story, just a hopeful alias, J.M., recovering adult learner. The grant application was tight. He'd rehearsed every word. He'd even written about humility, about redemption, about how people weren't the worst thing they'd ever done. The reply came in under 72 hours. Dear applicant, thank you for your submission to the Quiet Rise Fund. At this time, we cannot offer support. Our mission remains aligned with those who have been wronged, not those who once did the wrong. We wish you well on your journey. Josh read the words twice, then a third time. His hand slowly moved to close the laptop. He didn't cry. Not anymore. He simply exhaled, a long, defeated breath that sounded like something final letting go. Vanessa, meanwhile, had disappeared from digital existence. Her curated photos, once bathed in warm filters and smug captions, were long gone. She'd rebranded 3 times before the algorithm caught up to her. Now, she worked as a virtual assistant under a different last name. No sponsors, no followers. Just forgotten hashtags buried beneath the noise of newer, shinier influencers. Carolyn passed away on a morning so still that even the birds seemed to wait for her permission to sing. She was sitting in her garden chair, Oscar curled at her feet, a quilt over her lap. Her hands were folded neatly, the final pages of a book resting in her lap. The hospice nurse found her with a smile on her lips. She didn't leave a video. She didn't leave a speech. She'd already said everything that mattered. The obituary ran a week later in local and national outlets. It was short, elegant. Carolyn June Armitage, 78. She left quietly, but her echo changed lives. Founder of the Quiet Rise Fund, estate literacy advocate, and survivor of financial abuse. She is survived by those she chose, not those who assumed. Her niece, Elise, now a trust advisor and executor of the estate, stood at the fund's headquarters on the day the newest round of grants went out. One of them went to a 15-year-old girl named Melanie, a straight-A student who'd grown up in shelters and had taught herself to code on a public library computer. She held the envelope in both hands like it might fly away if she didn't. Inside was the letter, the kind that wasn't digital, that smelled faintly of rosewater and parchment. It read, "To the girl who thinks no one sees her, we do. You matter, and you will build something no one can take from you. From someone who once stayed quiet." Melanie pressed it to her chest. Outside, wind rustled the flags above the Quiet Rise Fund building. Somewhere far beyond, a woman's voice lived on, not in volume, but in impact.